There was nothing. Amidst the nothing, she floated. The nothingness was as a river, its gentle current carrying her along. She sensed others nearby, others that she thought she knew. Echoes of herself, eddies, ripples out of reach and out of view. They intangibly drifted nearby, but she didn't pay them any mind. Why was that? They were important. Or at least she understood that they should be. But there were other things, more important things. Yet she didn't know what they were. She only knew that she was annoyed. Annoyed for, why? What was it? She was annoyed for somewhere between an instant and an eternity, and the gentle sensations of the current did little to soothe her. A tendril of something appeared somewhere to stretch out towards her. She snatched it impatiently, disregarding all that was left behind. Her eyes fluttered open. Leaves came into focus. Wind filtered through the canopy, uncaring of the vague sense of annoyance stirring in her heart. Over her body, a cool, damp sensation. She sucked in a breath and instantly regretted it. 1,000 needles gripped her body and squeezed. "How are you feeling, Ludmilla?" She could barely hear Themis' voice through her ragged coughing. Lifting her arm unsteadily, she rested it on her chest, trying to work the pins and needles away. Under her fingers, she felt something soft where her armor should have been. Someone had removed it, and she was left in her arming doublet. Ludmilla turned her head to the side, towards the cleric seated beside her. Ludmilla's throat seized, and dry coughs filled the air. She moistened her lips and worked some saliva down before trying again. Even then, the muscles of her jaw protested. "Did we win?" she asked. Themis made a sound through her nose. "You must be the only one that says that sort of thing immediately after returning from Lord Sursana's domain." She rolled her eyes. "He must spin you around and push you right back out the moment you pop up." "That may be the case," Ludmilla conceded, "but, did we win?" "Of course we did," the cleric smirked. "You're always the only casualty of your own crazy plans. The rest of those lechers wanted to hang around and gawk at you, so I chased them away." "Thanks." It wasn't something she would have worried about half a year ago, but, after enjoying a degree of privacy in her home and being subjected to the continued admonishments of Amelia over what an acceptable appearance was, a small sense of shame had crept into her self-awareness. Laying where she was, she turned her head from side to side to examine her surroundings again. It was a forest. Well, it was supposed to be one. The stone columns all around them were made to resemble trunks of trees, while vines covered the magically lit ceiling overhead. Sprigs of moss and brush covered the floor, and the wind, well, she wasn't sure where it came from, but it was probably just the natural flow of air in the now extensive adventurer training area. They were several dozen meters away from where she had met her demise. The final confrontation for this particular setting was a demi-human ambush. The would-be ambushers were detected well in advance and, knowing where the trap was laid, Ludmilla decided to simply spring it. The party's mana was barely touched and their reserves of consumables were still in plentiful supply, so a solid defensive line was to meet the ambushers and the rest of the party would overwhelm them. Except, once again, she had failed to hold her part of the line. Still, looking at the pristine state of Themis' equipment, it would seem that the rest of the plan had been a clear success. "So," Themis said, "what was it like?" Ludmilla frowned at her. "Being dead, I mean," Themis clarified quickly. Do you remember anything? From the other side?" "Nothing at all," Ludmilla shook her head. "Shouldn't a priestess know more about this sort of thing than a noble?" "Well, I know what's been recorded, but I can't help but ask. The other time I was around, I was a bit preoccupied losing my wits over watching your head get squished." "Who raised me? I don't see anyone else around." "It was Lady Pestonia, as usual," Themis answered. "She left to tend to everyone else after that." Ludmilla brought herself up on her elbows and was greeted by the sight of a suit of armor lying near her feet. "I just had that made," she muttered. The suit of brigandine, fashioned by one of Smith Mesmit's associates, was folded in on one side at a right angle. Ludmilla distinctly remembered being folded right along with it. "So much for upgrading my armor." To be fair, the suit itself had survived, it was just the person inside that had not. She had seen enough of Kovalev's work repairing tools, parts and other pieces of metalwork to understand all that needed to be done was to fix or replace the warped plates and the armor would be serviceable again. She had purchased it in hopes that it would help alleviate her ongoing defensive issues, but it was evidently insufficient. What was she going to do now? "We'll have to carry that out of here," Themis said. "I'm sure you'll be getting quite the reception as well." A sigh escaped Ludmilla's lips. That was the worst part about dying. Whenever she did, all of the benefits that she conferred to those under her vanished as well. Everyone felt it, too. The degree varied, from the tenants out in Warden's Vale having a vague, nearly intangible sense of her absence, to her household instantly realizing what had occurred. It was as if someone conveniently informed her entire domain that their liege had died, every single time. It was extremely mortifying at best and produced some worrisome results. The first time she had died, she returned to the Adventurer Guild, only to find her human retainers in the city gathered in the reception area. Amelia was brandishing a broom like a poleaxe, threatening to tear the entire building apart if the receptionists didn't show them directly to their mistress. Ludmilla walked into the guild hall with a bemused expression on her face at the scene and was subsequently buried by sobbing maids. After returning to the manor, she found a pile of panicked messages from Warden's Vale. Dying appeared to be quite disruptive, so she decided that it should be avoided if possible, and then she died again. "How many times is this now?" she asked. 5? Something like that. She hated dying. It was a strange thing to be thinking, but there it was nonetheless. It wasn't even the dying part that annoyed her, despite being cut in half once, run through and bludgeoned to death in various ways. No, what annoyed her was the idea that she had lost what she had worked so hard to gain. And regain again. Life could be returned, but not time. Ludmilla died twice in a row on the first weekend back in the Adventurer Guild, then trained hard to restore her lost strength. Then she died again. The process repeated once more until now, where she lay on the cold stone floor, recently dead yet again. The sense that she was behind where she should rightly be kept driving her forward, but something was clearly wrong with what she was doing. At this rate, Ludmilla mused, I wonder if people will just get used to it. This probably isn't something one would want to get used to. Themis gave her a sidelong glance as they started making their way back outside. If it happens too much, they're going to start accounting for resurrection failure. Then it's back to those boring copper and iron sessions for you. I guess that's ample motivation to avoid death, she said, but I don't understand what I'm doing wrong. Themis appeared to have nothing to offer in reply, and they returned together to the surface in silence. Once they were out under the clear evening skies, Ludmilla withdrew a mantle from her bag to pull around her shoulders. In doing so, she was reminded that she didn't actually have to carry all of her equipment in her arms. The damaged armor, along with her weapons and shield, went into the infinite haversack on her right hip. That's such a convenient item, Themis noted as she watched everything vanish into the bag. I wonder if more will start showing up soon. Ludmilla had two of the magical containers, both taking the form of a large, dark leather belt pouch. One was placed where a quiver would normally rest upon her hip, while the other balanced out her belt on the opposite side. After a fresh death, their combined weight was quite noticeable, though training would gradually lessen the burden again as she regained her strength. It wasn't the only thing that she noticed a change in as she died and trained and died again. Her agility, conditioning and perception differed, as did how well she could hide her presence and all sorts of other things she never really put much thought into until now. I've asked around, Ludmilla told her. Apparently they're out there, but it's pretty rare to find something like this for sale. It makes sense, considering how convenient they are. They aren't something someone would resell like other magic items. I see, Themis said. I'm glad the cathedral is right on the main plaza. I can see all the stands that sell to adventurers from the entrance. Didn't Bishop Hostine give you an earful for that last week? Ludmilla said, you ran straight out the door to buy something from the market in your temple vestments. Humph, Themis was not dissuaded. Being an adventurer was his idea in the first place, and the scriptures do not prohibit shopping. They laughed together and returned to Erantle in good humor. Along the way, Ludmilla scanned the skies to the horizon. When they were heading towards the training area on her first day back to the guild, two frost dragons skimmed low over the ground. One looked like it was struggling mightily to stay aloft. Judging by its rotund appearance, it must have been Lady Aura's new companion, Hegemil. The second dragon, a lithe adult who had gracefully descended to Hegemil's altitude, fell into formation beside him. They were so close to the ground that Ludmilla could overhear their conversation as they slowly passed overhead. Eventually, they picked up in speed and altitude, disappearing into the northern skies. It was a novel sight, and she thought that maybe the reports on the frost dragons were not wholly accurate. According to the documents provided by Lady Schultier, the enclave had been forced into existence by a single ancient dragon, the White Dragon Lord, Olisur Dark. Without his efforts, they would have not come together, as their kind was solitary by nature, exhibiting the pride, vanity and selfishness attributed by law to dragons in general. The pair that had flown over them, however, seemed more like a pair of siblings, a fretful sister watching over and lecturing her brother. It felt like a reflection of herself, not too long ago, haranguing her own family over their often irresponsible and reckless behavior. Perhaps they weren't as strange and unknowable as was claimed. Entering through the northern gate, they crossed a peddler headed out of the city, and Ludmilla felt a twinge of envy. Wardensvale still needed to complete 2 or 3 more villages before merchants would consider her domain worth the detour, so her tenants still had a while yet to wait before they could enjoy the same variety of goods as the other territories. They made their way through the city, along the wall that separated the demi-human quarter from the common area. Cutting through the central district, they came across Amelia, who was scanning the main promenade with a worried look on her face. Their eyes met, and her lady's maid quickly walked over to meet them. "My lady," she lowered her head in a curtsy, "just now, did you die?" Ludmilla filled in for her, "Yes, quite thoroughly. You should see what happened to the new set of armor that you fancied me wearing so much." Ludmilla unfastened the infinite haversack on her right hip and produced the damaged brigandine. Amelia's eyes grew alarmingly wide. "Why, what are they making you fight?" she said tearfully. "Death Knights? Dragons? This is too much, my lady." "It was an ogre, actually." Amelia looked at her incredulously, then back to the armor again. "An ogre did this, my lady? But this is plate." "Brigandine," Ludmilla corrected her. "Are ogres really that strong?" Amelia asked. "I thought they were something iron-rank adventurers frequently hunted as bounties. Did they use magical weapons?" "It was just a stick," Ludmilla replied. "A hickory staff, just like the haft of my spear. The ogres we fought are much stronger than the ones you usually find out in the wilderness." Thankfully, no one else trained ogres like the bloody general did in Carney. The dim-witted demi-humans were usually easy to deal with, but their being proficient in combat made these ones another thing entirely. Amelia was silent for several moments, giving the armor a long look. "How strong are adventurers, my lady?" she asked. This was supposed to be the exam for gold ranks. How strong are they if they are adamantite, or even platinum? If an ogre can do this. Her maid had a sort of blank expression as she spoke, as if doubting everything she thought she understood. Ludmilla couldn't blame her. The common person was far removed from the world that powerful adventurers saw. To most, they were simply the focus of fanciful tales in a part of the world that was beyond the realm of common sense, one that they would never experience themselves. How could a city laborer accept that a slip of a girl could bend tempered steel into knots with her bare hands, or a fully armored man could leap straight up city walls and hop from tower to tower like some overgrown child at play? Such individuals were exceedingly rare and generally not available to frivolously demonstrate their abilities at a whim to all and sundry. Even Ludmilla, who was born to an adventurer lineage, did not truly understand the meaning of what ranks beyond gold entailed until she had directly experienced it herself. No amount of instruction from her family or observing others had prepared her for it. The members of the Adventurer Guild that had recently approached or achieved gold rank, holding the notion that they had finally qualified for the expedition teams, had their pride beaten out of them in turn. Gold was merely the beginning, the bare minimum of what was required for their work. The adventurer training sessions are matched to the participants, Ludmilla explained to her. "I was supposed to be able to fight that ogre directly, but I was swatted aside like a down pillow instead. Until I figure out what I'm doing wrong, I won't be able to advance." "I see." Amelia turned her gaze down to the cobblestones, then raised it again to look at the damaged armor. "Let me take care of that for you while you conclude your business with the Adventurer Guild, my lady." Her lady's maid held out her hands to receive the equipment, but Ludmilla returned it to her infinite haversack. "It's all right, Lutzi," Ludmilla told her. "Everything that goes in here doesn't increase my burdens. I'll drop by Mesmit's forge later." Amelia lowered her arms and frowned, bestowing upon the magical container a glare that one might have reserved for an enemy. Ludmilla shifted on her feet, feeling a bit guilty for depriving her of her duties. "Did we receive any messages from home?" she asked. "We did, my lady," Amelia replied. "It seems that the Lynham sisters sent one on behalf of the entire harbor. Then we received a number from the farming village. Please let them know right away that everything is fine. We cannot leave them worried like that." "Of course, my lady," her maid curtsied again. "I will see to it immediately." Amelia paid her respects to Themis before turning away to head back to the manor. "At least your household didn't lay siege to the Guildhall this time," Themis said after they re-entered the common area. "Ah, don't remind me," Ludmilla replied weakly. "I have enough anxiety as it is wondering what they'll say about the session today." "They were pretty dumbfounded the first time," Themis said, "though I guess some of that might have come from having to deal with your retainers. Guess we'll find out in a minute." Having the words come from a cleric of the god of death and judgment did not soothe her worries in any way whatsoever. They entered the Guildhall to find Mary waiting for them inside, near the bottom of the stairs. She jerked her head in the direction of the second floor before heading up without a word. Ludmilla exchanged glances with Themis, the heavy feeling in the pit of her stomach growing even more pronounced. When they reached the top of the stairs, not only were the proctors and the guildmaster awaiting them around the conference table, but Lady Aura, Lord Mayor, Moman and Nobby as well. "Oh Lord," Themis intoned under her breath. "Watch over your faithful servant in her hour of judgment." Ludmilla suppressed the urge to swallow as she stepped forward, folding her hands neatly in front of her as she silently awaited the debriefing by the Adventurer Guild's senior staff. Her gaze drifted from person to person, wondering who would deliver her verdict. "We spoke with the ogre you faced off against," Moman said, "and we're now reasonably certain as to what's going on. Just to be sure, though, could you describe to us how you conducted your defense during the final battle of this session?" Ludmilla must have reviewed the fatal moment 24 times in her mind while she and Themis made their way back from the training area. There was nothing she could think of that she could have improved on without relying on sheer luck to survive. What she did should have worked. It was a standard response to a simple and obvious attack. Unsure just where in the final battle they wanted her to start, she described everything from the beginning in case there was some crucial information that she had not considered. "Our scout detected them well in advance," she told them. "The ogres set up an ambush where the forest trail narrowed into a bottleneck with no other way around. Our casters had full mana reserves and we had plenty of consumables to spare, so I decided to use the ambush in our favor by starting the fight in a way that I thought they would roughly expect." "So you moved your defensive line forward and kept your offensive line beyond notice," Moman said, "until the ambushers were positioned for your own ambush." "That's correct," Ludmilla replied. "I feel that this tactic is used all too often," Moman mused. "Did no other plans come to mind that could have been carried out in that situation?" "Several, yes," Ludmilla admitted, "but I was taught that the best plans are both effective and simple. The more complicated your plans are, the easier it is for them to fall apart. Convoluted plans are only to be used when you enjoy a comfortable advantage, and see an opportunity to pursue other objectives. In this case, our would-be ambushers have conveniently contained themselves in a narrow area where we could easily hold them while our offense would be free to operate without hindrance. Except, in this case, the defense did not hold out as easily as you had predicted," Moman said. "I understand that. If all members of your front line were successful, it would have gone as you said, which leads us to your personal performance, and the reason for your failure." Ludmilla turned her eyes down, staring at the polished grain of the floorboards at her feet. Her time away from training with the Adventurer Guild was now catching up to her, and it was costing her heavily. Every time it mattered, it seemed that she was dealt with so quickly that she couldn't even tell what was going on. She looked up when someone cleared her throat, and a quick glance made her realize that they were waiting for her to continue. "We advanced to take our positions at the ambush point," she said, "and the ogres came out of hiding to charge our line as we did so. The one headed in my direction readied itself to make a very obvious, but powerful attack, so I adjusted my stance and weapon to deflect it away. When the predicted strike came, however, it did not turn aside as I expected. It simply went through the haft of my spear and caved in my armor. No matter how I think about it, it makes no sense how the attack could have resulted in that outcome. I understand that ogres are strong, but I sensed that the one facing me wasn't that strong. That's all you have to relate? Momin asked after several seconds of silence. Yes, Ludmilla answered, those are the events as I remember them. Was it helpful in any way? Eintzak, Mary, Moknich and Momin exchanged glances. You didn't try to, use anything? Mary asked from where she stood near Lady Aura and Lord Mayor. I didn't have any items readied, nor was I using any concealed equipment. Ludmilla wasn't sure what she was asking. Any healing items or spells would have been too late. And that's how it is, Eintzak sighed, and everyone leaned back. Ridiculous. The guildmaster placed his hands on the table and looked down with an incredulous expression on his face. The sight made Ludmilla cringe internally. If she had some power to make herself shrivel up and disappear into the cracks between the floorboards, she would have used it right then. She hadn't felt this way since she broke down in front of darkness when they first met. Never mind addressing the issue, she seemed to be the only one oblivious as to what it was. Maybe you should explain what you mean before she jumps over the railing, Lady Aura said. Eintzak, who was brooding over his own statement, looked up towards her. Oh. Sorry, I didn't mean you in particular, Zaradnik. It's a part of a larger problem with the Adventurer Guild at the moment. Ludmilla furrowed her brow and shifted uncomfortably at his apology. I can't recall anything that I've learned from the members of the Adventurer Guild or our training sessions that would lead to this outcome, she said. This should be entirely my responsibility, Guildmaster. What I'm getting at is that it's something adventurers have always normally learned over time and through their association with the guild, Eintzak told her. Because you come from an adventurer lineage, and you appear to excel in many other areas, we assumed that your upbringing provided you with everything you needed to know. Everything else about you demonstrated your expertise so clearly that we didn't consider otherwise. Just checking one last time, Mary said, but you didn't use any skills, spells or martial arts there, right? I don't know anything of the sort that could be used in that situation, Ludmilla replied. By the gods, Moknich said. But how? There's no way she can't. Even a brat who has the time to train hard for a while will pick up one or two. Someone that's trained for as long as it looks like she has should have dozens. That was my thinking, as well, Eintzak said, but you heard her. I guess it didn't help any the way she advanced. There was the first run as Copper, where we already expected her entire team to be Iron or better already, then she had to attend to some other business before we could figure out how strong she actually was at that point. When she came back, she breezed through the silver exam in a pretty unconventional way and, for her gold exam, she ended up going in headfirst against a bunch of ogres from the Bloody General's army. The first martial arts user she was put up against was the one that killed her, and it doesn't help that she's so damn quiet doing everything. Several heads around the table nodded slowly at the guildmaster's words. It was not the end of what Eintzak had to say, however. This is definitely our culprit, he said. All of those who joined as Copper ranks after the formation of the new Adventurer Guild are having the same damn problem. They're clearly gaining in strength, but they haven't had time to develop a lot of the things that come with it. I still can't quite believe it, but Zaradnik's actually a part of that group. Does that mean I have to rebalance everything? Lord Mayor asked. How do you mean? The demi-humans that come to participate in the gold rank trials as final encounters are trained before coming here. So they all have martial arts, he explained, but the summons that we use at this level don't have much in the way of special skills or abilities. Most have one or two tricks at best. That's a good point, Eintzak frowned. The difficulty of the regular encounters might be too low. Once our members all have the appropriate martial arts, skills, and spells, the performance of the teams should improve accordingly. It appears that nothing can substitute for time when it comes to these things, Momin said. Now that we have a good idea of what the problem is, what can we do on the training end to ensure that we have a common standard in our membership from this point onwards, Eintzak? It's not something that the Adventurer Guild has done before, Eintzak stroked his moustache, but it should be simple enough. In the old guild, Pretty much every adventurer capable of them started picking up basic martial arts before gold rank, mostly around silver. Really? Copper and iron members never really received much attention as a whole, but martial arts have been demonstrated as early as iron in the past. It's a rough idea, but, since we're taking care of all of our members now, we can probably come up with something in addition to our regular training area sessions. It should give all of our rancy warrior types something to do while the casters are recovering their mana, too. That sounds like a promising start, Momen nodded. How long until you can get started? Well, even if it's just the iron ranks, Einsak replied, we're going to need a large space to train in. We're also going to want to make sure that standards are upheld through all the ranks, if possible. We've stripped down the first floor of the central district with the thought that we could use it as a training hall, but I never imagined that we would need it so soon. Do you think we could get some help speeding things along there, Momen? That shouldn't be a problem, Momen said. First floor, central district, What is it? His Majesty has made personal efforts to improve exposure for the Adventurer Guild to help with recruitment, Momen said. This seems like the perfect opportunity to build on those efforts by creating a place where the public can observe our members. What do you have in mind? Einsak asked. We can convert part of the ground floor into a sparring area that can be viewed from the streets around it, Momen explained. It's not exactly the main plaza, but you should be able to attract an audience all the same. Actually, since traffic through the central district is not severe, it's even better. Collecting spectators around the building won't cause any issues. What about the students in training? Moknich asked. Martial arts take both focus and discipline to execute. Having an audience will be pretty distracting. All the better, I say, Momen answered. Adventurers are supposed to be able to function under pressure anyways. Consider it an aid. Fair enough, Moknich grunted. We're supposed to be a government organization now, though. Are you sure it's all right for our members to show their stuff in public? Any sort of widespread knowledge shouldn't be a problem. Those sorts of martial arts aren't considered secrets anyways. Even more advanced ones used by higher-ranked adventurers aren't really that. Momen looked up from his musings. How many unique martial arts do we even have right now in the active membership? The adventurers fell deep into thought, but it didn't take long to arrive at an answer. I think the members of Rainbow are the only long-time veterans of the guild that have them, Moknich finally said. But we've specialized in commissions revolving around undead, usually in the Katsa Plains. I've got a couple, Mary has quite a few. Actually, seeing that she's as old as time itself, that shouldn't be a surprise, I guess. Hey. I'm not that old, Mary scowled. Moknich is right though. In addition to all the usual ranger stuff, I have a sensory art for locating undead, and both ranged and melee attacks that do all sorts of nasty things to them. It's the same way in other places. If you're specializing in whatever the place has to offer, you end up figuring out better ways to do your job. Most unique martial arts come about through developing what you need. Ludmilla's ears perked at the mention of a sensory art. It sounded something like the ability she had gained during her time in Facet County. She tried using it while they discussed amongst themselves, but, as expected, she couldn't. In that case, Moknich said, it could be that the martial arts that we consider unique may not actually be. There may be other places in the world like Katsa Plains, and the people that fight there independently come up with the same techniques against undead. It wouldn't surprise me if similar martial arts were developed that way, Mary replied, but they're bound to have their differences. Even basic martial arts do, though we tend to just lump them together to simplify things. The ones that demi-humans use are effectively variants of what we use unless it brings something into play that we don't have, like a tail or wings. I suppose it doesn't hurt to err on the side of caution with this, Momen told them. Einsak, what's the earliest you've seen someone employ highly advanced martial arts? Mithril, probably. The guildmaster replied, maybe people start developing their own stuff before then, but I've never seen anyone pull one off before that. Not publicly, anyway. Around here, you're more likely to see people using combinations of basic stuff at that point. Einsak looked at Moknich and Mary, who shook their heads in response. Let's go with that, then, Einsak said. We're still trying to raise the quantity of gold-ranked members, so it'll be clear to use the first floor to practice for a while yet. People that want to develop their own martial arts can do so in private at some other place. We'll prepare in the future. For the time being, we'll be making sure our iron ranks learn martial arts, or the skills and abilities appropriate to their rank as we determine what they should be. Exams from this point onward will be modified to ensure that our members can use them in a manner appropriate to their ranks, and that should be the end of members slipping by our notice like this. Can changes be implemented on your end to reflect this, Mayor? Momin asked. Yuan, Lord Mayor nodded. I'll ask the demi-humans around the Sorceress Kingdom to send lower levels to participate on the dungeon teams. I'll adjust the difficulty of all the summons and things as well. As long as we have what is needed to create the conditions required for our updated exams, Momin said. I would say that this is a solid step in the right direction. It's good that we can make fixes. Lord Mayor's gaze rested strangely on Ludmilla with the last phrase. He jumped up with a cry after Lady Aura jabbed him in the ribs with a finger. Anyways, Einzak cleared his throat. We'll have sessions in the training area for silver rank and above put on hold until Mayor is ready. Meanwhile, we can put our heads together on the details of this supplemental training. The Guildmaster looked around the table to see if anyone had anything else to add, then his eyes fell on Ludmilla. Oh, you're still here, he said. Sorry for making you stand through all that. It's all right, Guildmaster, she replied with a light smile. I found the discussion quite informative. I see, Einzak said. Well, since you've heard it firsthand, I'm sure you know what's in store. Head to the reception counter and trade in your silver plate for iron. There's some training in store for you. The discussion from the second floor suddenly ceased as Ludmilla made her way down to the stairs. She paused her steps in confusion, backtracking until the voices came back, then went back down again. It appeared that the meeting on the second floor had countermeasures against eavesdropping. Rounding the end of the stairs, she glanced at the request board as she made her way to the front desk. Once filled with jobs for adventurers to fulfill, it was now filled with information about the guild and their new purpose, even going so far as to outline the benefits of membership. There were no prospective applicants awaiting service, however, so Ishpan and Winner waited with bored expressions. Ludmilla unclasped her silver tag and placed it on the counter. Good receptionist, she said, I would like to apply for an iron plate. Ishpan glanced down at the offered article. I don't think I've seen an adventurer demoted before, the receptionist said, never mind multiple times. How many is this, now? It's only the second time. Ishpan let out a derisive snort. Only. She took the silver plate in hand, turning to disappear into the back hall. How do you keep going like that? Ludmilla looked back from the hallway entrance to Winner, who had voiced the question. Like what? You've died 5 times, always at the same point too, Winner said. Anyone else would at least take a step back after having it happen in such a short period of time, yet you seem positively unflappable. It's not that I don't think anything of it, Ludmilla replied slowly, the feeling is a bit hard to describe. Have you ever had a long day of work, only to find that you're actually behind where you should be? I guess. It's something like that. You end up burning the midnight oil just to catch up again because you trouble others otherwise, and you never know what the next day will bring. Procrastination just makes it worse. Not everyone is like that, Ishpan said as she returned to the counter. A lot of people are perfectly happy with turning in for the night and waiting until the next day to deal with it. That's entirely irresponsible, Ludmilla furrowed her brow. How could anyone think like that? Because they don't care? Ishpan shrugged. Or at least the problem isn't big enough to them that they'd go out of their way to fix it. Merchants and tradesmen that have to uphold strict contracts with penalties attached to them might be compelled to behave properly, but a lot of vocations aren't held to the same standards. Self-interest is the order of the day for plenty of people. Ludmilla reconsidered Winner's question. Do you mean to say that organizations that offer some leeway are prone to having people that shirk their responsibilities? She asked. Is it becoming a problem in the new adventurer guild since their needs are provided for by the government? What? Winner frowned. The adventurers have ample motivation to perform, Ishpan said. I'm not even sure how you ended up going down that avenue of thought. Ludmilla glanced back at Winner, who appeared to affirm Ishpan's assertion. Looking down at the floor, she stepped back and let out a sigh. I guess I've been in that frame of mind for months now, Ludmilla said. I'm always fixing something or figuring out how to make things work, so everything feels like a problem to me. I apologize for bringing that attitude into a casual discussion. The two receptionists exchanged glances. Ever thought about taking it easy for a bit? Ishpan said as she placed the iron tag on the counter. Maybe you're just wound up too tightly. How about a nice dinner with someone you like or something? Ludmilla retrieved the iron tag, slipping it into one of her belt pouches. That was definitely something she didn't have time for right now. I think my current situation is manageable, she said. Besides, I don't have time to take it easy. Work is still ongoing in my domain, the summer harvest is coming, I have to keep up with training and I have other important duties. I quite enjoy it all, however, I don't consider it a burden. Are you sure about that? Ishpan peered at her suspiciously. You're starting to sound like a crazy person. No less crazy than the other nobles, Ludmilla said. Corlin, Wagner and Gonye are even busier than I am. You make it sound as if it's a good thing. It's good to be busy. There are limits, Ishpan rolled her eyes. Look, just try spending time with someone nice once in a while and see how it works out for you. You might surprise yourself. The footsteps abruptly sounded from the staircase to her right. They looked over to find the meeting appeared to have adjourned, its members making their way out of the building. Guildmaster Ironsack came over to the counter, his gaze going between the three women. Is everything all right here? He asked. We were just chatting, Ishpan answered. How did the meeting go? More things to do, the Guildmaster said. Maybe it's good that we didn't get too many new members right away, there's quite a bit we've left unaddressed. Sorry if I came across a bit heavy-handed back there, Zaradnik. It didn't feel that way at all, Guildmaster Ironsack, Ludmilla replied. If anything, I'm relieved that there's an apparent solution to these ongoing problems. Hey, you got that right, he said. Everything's been moving so fast that the basics are being left behind. Supplementary training is going to have to be an ongoing thing and, even then, we're going to be hard-pressed to keep up. Speaking of which, are you sure you don't know any martial arts? Not that I know of, Guildmaster. That's really strange, the Guildmaster leaned on the counter. Your parents both had plenty of martial arts, and your brothers were picking up the same ones. You've clearly been trained by them as well, so it's a mystery as to why you don't. How long has it been since you first started learning how to fight? The same time I started schooling, she replied, so around 5 or 6. He looked up at her reply with an arched eyebrow. Wow, you frontier nobles don't screw around, he said. If that's the case, this whole thing is even more puzzling. If you've been training for over a decade to fight, you should have a lot of martial arts under your belt. If it's of any help, my parents didn't teach my brothers any special techniques until they thought they were ready for patrol duties, though they did try once or twice before being found out and told to stop. I just started patrols last autumn, but my father and brothers were busy preparing for the annual skirmish with the Empire. So you never asked your brothers how they did it? The Guildmaster said. I feel like that'd be quite tempting. Of course not, Ludmilla replied. Rules exist for a reason. He stroked his moustache after her response, and a smile slowly formed. I think I get it, now, he said. You do? Yep, well, it's no guarantee, but I have a strong feeling. I guess you'll have to see when we get started. Then I will look forward to it, Guildmaster Ironsack. Ludmilla lowered her head slightly. Not an ounce of curiosity, eh? I wouldn't say that I'm not curious at all, but... The rules. Guildmaster Ironsack shook his head. I gotcha. You're truly a daughter of House Zaradnik, you know. Duty and rules and all. Is that so? Ludmilla replied with a slight smile. I've had to chase my father and brothers around quite a bit for not attending properly to their administrative responsibilities. Okay, now you're scaring me, he gave her a look. The adventurers that you're teamed up with aren't going to slowly turn into soldiers or something, are they? No, why would that happen? No reason, the Guildmaster cleared his throat. Anyways, I got a lot of work ahead of me, so I'm going to bring back some dinner from the plaza. Oh, since things are basically on hold past silver rank while we get things sorted out, you won't have any training for a while. I figured you'd want to know since you're always juggling that schedule of yours around. Thank you, Guildmaster, Ludmilla replied. I'll be sure to take advantage of it. Guildmaster Reinsack vanished into the back hall, appearing again several seconds later with his coat. He nodded to her as he walked by and rounded the staircase towards the front exit. I should get going as well, Ludmilla told the receptionists. I have a lot of reading waiting for me tonight. Have a good evening, Winner said. Don't forget, Ishban called out after her as Ludmilla rounded the stairs, dinner with someone nice. Ludmilla smiled to herself at Ishban's stubborn insistence, placing her hand on the sturdy wooden door of the guild hall. Outside, the plaza was already brightly lit under its enchanted street lamps, and the evening crowds thronged in the lanes between the colorful rows of stands. The air was filled with the aroma of food and wood smoke, tempting her growing appetite. She absently scanned her surroundings out of habit and was in turn made keenly aware that her senses were not as sharp as they were before. The absurd reality of the levels that Lady Shiltier had mentioned to her months ago was again demonstrating itself to her firsthand. A part of her felt that it was entirely natural and right and expected, yet defining it in concrete terms had turned this natural thing distinctly odd. The trick she had learned to conceal her presence was no longer as effective either. Dozens of people turned to glance in her direction, despite her not actively doing anything to draw it. An odd-eyed gaze drew her own attention as she left the front of the Adventurer Guild to make her way towards the central district. Lord Mayor, Ludmilla lowered her head as he approached her from the tree he was standing under. Were you waiting for me? My apologies if so, I wasn't aware of it. Lord Mayor clutched his staff as he looked up at her, the sheen of his golden hair catching the lamplight. He was quite short, standing around the height of her waist, and she was never sure whether it was more rude to keep looking down at him, or kneeling to talk to him as if he were a child. Granted, he was a child, but, at the same time, he was a prominent member of the royal court. It's all right, he said. It wasn't long. Sorry. He turned his gaze downwards, poking at a loose cobblestone with the end of his staff. If you're apologizing for what happened, my lord, Ludmilla said, I don't feel any differently than any other time. I'm not holding anything against you for it. Is that so? He closed his eyes and let out a small sigh, then looked up at her again. Then, there's something I'd like to ask if you don't mind. Ludmilla looked around them. Lord Mayor had a request for her. How may I be of service, my lord? She said, actually, if this is something that needs to be discussed at length, would you like to join me for dinner? Will that be okay? He looked up again. I don't want to be a bother or anything. It's perfectly fine, my lord, Ludmilla smiled. In fact, someone recently advised me to have dinner with someone nice. I've had fresh ingredients shipped in from Warden's Vale, so our meal will have the same sort of stew that you had the last time you came to visit my domain. Lord Mayor nodded, and they made their way towards the central district. Mrs. Roach, Lord Mayor will be joining us for dinner this evening. Ludmilla cast her voice in the direction of the manor, yet, despite having done it on multiple occasions, she was always curious whether it successfully reached its recipient or not. If what she understood of it so far held true, there was no reason why it wouldn't. Because the ability did not facilitate a reply, however, there were always doubts as to whether it had been received. Is Lady Aura present in the city, my lord? She asked. Perhaps she would like to join us as well. Big Sis went to do her rounds, Lord Mayor answered. I sent her on her way just before you came out of the Adventurer Guild. She usually orders something later at night. I see. Well, I guess it's just the two of us, then. Though carts and wagons still made their way through the streets, most of the city folk gathered in plazas, taverns and homes for their evening meal at this hour. With the lull in the city's bustling traffic, they found themselves crossing into the central district in short order. So, how have you been doing recently, Lord Mayor? She asked as they strolled along at a more relaxed pace. Me? He seemed surprised that she had asked. Okay, I guess. You must be quite busy with your duties taking care of the territories, the demi-human quarter and the Adventurer Guild. It's busy, but I like it, Lord Mayor smiled. It's good to have something to do. I keep telling people that, Ludmilla smirked, but they always tell me to relax instead. Really? He frowned. Lord Ine sometimes says that to us. That we should rest properly and take breaks. Maybe it was just the difference between a vassal's mindset and that of everyone else. Duty and responsibility were contingent on recognition and trust, a sign of strengthening ties between liege and vassal. Being able to carry them out in a satisfactory manner was a joy in itself, and treating them frivolously or outright disregarding them was a betrayal of the bonds between a noble and their liege. Perhaps that was why she and her friends couldn't help but react so vehemently when faced with the scions of House Fassett. The powerful vassals that came with the Sorcerer King might be strange in many ways, but in this aspect, at least, they appeared to be the same. Still, it was admirable for children like Lady Aura and Lord Mayor to show such maturity. "Maybe His Majesty is concerned for you, my lord," Ludmilla said. "It's apparent that he depends on you a great deal, but both you and your sister are still growing up. He might be worried about that." Maybe," he replied, "but whenever I try saying that to Big Sis, she still doesn't let me sleep in." "Lady Aura probably has the right of it," Ludmilla smirked. "There is a point where it becomes excessive." The two footmen standing at the entrance to the manor yard saluted as they approached. Once Terence and Rodney were fully used to working with the undead, she experimented with dividing yard security into 2 shifts. With 1 human and 1 death knight on each shift, the ones not watching the manor would be free to conduct business in the city, see to deliveries from Corlin Harbour, and take care of the various other tasks that were usually assigned to footmen. Though she had only tried it a few times so far, pairing them up this way reportedly worked quite well, providing both a human for interactions with others and making on-the-spot decisions, while the Death Knight had more than enough strength to handle most of the heavy lifting. It was her hope that one day, the Death Knights would be able to function just as well at the things that human footmen currently held an advantage in, but their close-mouthed nature made them seem like they preferred things the way they were. That being said, they got along quite well with the rest of her household, so she still wanted to see if that relationship could be extended to others. Just inside the gate, Tara stood awaiting them. "Good evening, Lord Mayor." Lady Zaradnik, the housekeeper, lowered her head. "I take it that you heard me, then, Mrs. Roach?" Ludmilla was too curious not to ask. "Yes, my lady," Tara replied. "It appears that we don't even need to consider hiring a page." Was she just putting a page out of a job? Considering that the demand for skilled labor was ever increasing, it was probably better that way. Realizing that she was keeping Lord Mayor waiting, she walked ahead and into the door, where Amelia awaited her. "Pardon the intrusion," Lord Mayor said as he stepped across the threshold. Working off her soiled boots, Ludmilla turned her head at the strange set of words. "Is that a mannerism of some sort, my lord?" she asked. "Yes," Mayor nodded, then tilted his head. "What did it sound like to you?" "I heard 'pardon the intrusion.'" Lord Mayor furrowed his brow. "Is that not correct, my lord?" Ludmilla asked. Sort of," he answered. "It's not the whole meaning though. If you use it in a different situation, it means something else." "I see," Ludmilla said. "That's actually quite a common thing to have happen. The meaning of speech is contingent on one's understanding of language. Those unlearned in the language that's actually being spoken will only hear the direct meaning, and only if the concept exists in the awareness of the listener." Ludmilla led Lord Mayor through the corridor, pausing when they reached the corridor. "I believe dinner is still being prepared, my lord." She glanced at Amelia, who nodded. "Would you like to wait in the courtyard or the drawing room?" "The courtyard is fine." "What you said just now, about language, does that mean that no one hears exactly what is being said?" "If 2 parties in a conversation speak the same language, they will hear exactly what is being said, down to accents and quirks of speech. If a different language is being spoken and the recipient does not understand it, then it would be as you say, they'll only understand what is being said, without any nuance or additional meanings. So you can't actually hear what Shiltir sounds like, because you don't know our language." "That's correct, my lord," Ludmilla said. "Her speech comes across to me as highly refined and elegant, but I'm unaware of any accent that she might have." "That's interesting, and weird?" Mayor frowned. "Weird, my lord?" "It's nothing," he said hurriedly. "I just wondered why the people here, the nobles and merchants especially, receive her so well. I guess I know the reason why now. Big Sis always gets annoyed when Shiltir is seen as a high-class lady while she's treated like a kid. A part of why she likes talking to you is for that reason, because you treat both her and Shiltir the same way. That should be the case for most nobles. As long as they understand who one is, they will act with the appropriate decorum. If proper introductions are made, even non-nobles should have a sense of proper conduct between their relative stations. We only do that on formal presentations to Lordines, Lord Mayor said. Anywhere else, it sounds conceited? He nodded. Someone who did that unnecessarily would be insufferable. I agree, she nodded in return. Usually it's not required, as important meetings are informed in advance, and the people that you regularly interact with already know who you are. Still, it's safer for both parties to understand who they are dealing with so they can make the appropriate considerations. Rather than a trapping of conceit, it is a courtesy extended. With a simple introduction, you can set the tone for a discussion, saving time and embarrassment. That is, of course, if both sides appreciate the same social graces. This is complicated. I suppose a simpler way to look at it is how important you feel that what you're doing is, Ludmilla said. For instance, if you are on an open errand for His Majesty, then you'd want the other party to know that you are representing His Majesty and not just yourself. Otherwise, they might not act appropriately, and unfortunate misunderstandings may arise as a result. Conversely, if it's just something that you're doing for your own interests, there's no need to say so unless the other party is blowing things out of proportion. Sometimes people will ask you, just to be sure. Do all humans act like this? Lord Mayor asked. Nobles surely do, my lord, Ludmilla answered, as do most merchants and craftsmen who deal with the nobility. It can vary quite a bit beyond that, but the relevance of one's responsibilities, or who they represent, should be reflected in relevant interactions. From the handful of dwarf merchants I've seen so far, I think that you might be able to extend this thinking to any race with similar social constructs. I see. Well, thanks for explaining. It is my pleasure to be of assistance, my lord. Ludmilla lowered her head. Now, I must excuse myself to prepare for dinner. If there's anything you require, please let Mrs. Rowe know.